What happens when an undercover boss buys a hot dog at his own diner and stops cold when he hears two cashiers? This is the story of Richard Blackwood, a man who built an empire but lost touch with the people who made it possible. It's a story of secrets, regrets, and the chance to make things right. Richard adjusted his baseball cap, pulling it low over his eyes. The fake mustache itched, and the denim jacket felt heavy on his shoulders. He barely recognized himself in the reflection of a car window. After 20 years of building Ricky's Grub Shack from a single food truck to a chain of 36 diners, Richard had become a stranger to his own business. He spent his days in a corner office, far removed from the smell of grilled onions and the sound of sizzling fries. But today, he was going back to where it all began. The original Ricky stood before him, its red and white checkered exterior as familiar as the lines on his face. The cartoon hot dog on the sign, wearing sunglasses, had been his design when he couldn't afford a marketing team. Now, that same hot dog was on billboards and TV commercials. Richard lingered outside, watching the lunch rush through the windows. His employees moved with practiced ease. But something felt off. The warmth he had once insisted on was missing. He pushed through the door, and the smell of grilled onions and fresh buns hit him like a wave of nostalgia. This was where he'd spent countless 18-hour days, perfecting recipes and scraping together tips to pay rent. It was also where he'd met Melissa, the woman who had once been his everything. He pushed that thought away. Today wasn't about the past. It was about understanding why customer satisfaction scores had dropped. Richard joined the line, studying the menu board. The prices had gone up, but the offerings were the same. His creation, the Big Ricky with secret sauce, still held the top spot. As he inched forward, he noticed small details, a smudge on a glass, a wobbly table, napkin dispensers that needed refilling, things a regional manager should have caught. When it was his turn, Richard stepped up to the counter. A young woman named Amber greeted him with a rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes. He ordered a classic hot dog with everything and a side of cheese fries. As he handed over a $10 bill, he noticed another cashier, Tina, whispering something to Amber. Both women glanced toward the back of the restaurant, their expressions suddenly animated. Richard pretended to check his phone, positioning himself to overhear. "I'm telling you, it's true," Tina whispered. "Macy from HR confirmed it yesterday. Jake has no idea." "How could he not know?" Amber replied. "I mean, he works for his own father." Richard's hand froze mid-swipe on his phone screen. His heart pounded in his ears. A son? He had a son? Impossible. Then a memory surfaced. Laura Matthews, 23 years ago. They dated for 6 months before she moved across the country. There had been no mention of a pregnancy, no hints, nothing. Order 42. The call jolted Richard back to the present. He moved mechanically toward the pickup counter, his mind spinning. The young man who handed him his tray couldn't have been more than 22 or 23. He had dark hair like Richard's, hazel eyes like Laura's, and a dimple in his right cheek, just like Richard's. Richard sat at a corner table, his food forgotten. He watched Jake work, handling the lunch rush with confidence and ease. There was something eerily familiar in the way he moved, like watching a younger version of himself. Richard's mind raced. How could Laura have kept this from him? What had she told Jake about his father? As the restaurant emptied, Richard approached Tina. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his voice gruff. "That young man, Jake, he seems like a hard worker." Tina smiled. "Oh, totally. Jake's like our unofficial shift leader. He's putting himself through community college, studying business, wants to open his own place someday." Richard felt a strange mix of pride and pain. "That's admirable," he said, "especially considering everything." Tina's expression softened. His mom raised him alone. She just passed away last month. Cancer. Richard's heart sank. Laura was gone. The woman he'd once loved, the mother of his son, had died without him ever knowing the truth. He returned to his seat, his mind racing. What kind of man had Jake become without him? What kind of father had Richard been, without even knowing it? 2 days later, Richard sat in his office, staring at an envelope. The DNA test results had arrived. He'd had Jake's coffee cup from their conversation collected. a move that now felt desperate and slightly unethical. But he needed to know. Jake entered the office, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt and slacks. The resemblance was even more striking in the harsh light of Richard's office. "Thank you for coming," Richard said. "I've been thinking about what you said about employee benefits and wages. You were right. I've been focused on expansion at the expense of the people who make Ricky successful." Jake's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's good," he said cautiously. "But is that why you asked me here?" Richard shook his head. "No, I wanted to give you this." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a scholarship program for Ricky's employees, covering full tuition, books, and living expenses. "You be the first recipient," Richard said. "You wouldn't need to use your mother's savings." Jake's jaw tightened. "I don't want your charity." "It's not charity," Richard said. "It's an investment in someone with enormous potential. Whether or not you're my son, you've earned this on your own merits." Jake closed the folder. "If you are my father, is this your way of making up for 23 years of absence?" Richard admitted, "Nothing can make up for that, but I'd like to try anyway." Jake stood, trembling. "You don't get to walk into my life and act like you have any right to be here. You weren't there when I broke my arm in 2nd grade. You weren't there for my high school graduation. You weren't there holding her hand when she died." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stood slowly. "You're right," he said quietly. "I wasn't there, and that's unforgivable, even if I didn't know you existed." He took a shaky breath. "But I'm here now, asking, begging for a chance to know my son." Jake stared at him, tears welling in his eyes. "This doesn't change anything. I'm still leaving. I still need to focus on school." "I understand," Richard said. "But before you go, would you like to know for sure?" He held out the envelope. Jake hesitated, then nodded. Richard carefully tore it open and read the results aloud. 99.9% probability of paternity. Jake didn't respond. He stood motionless, staring out the window. Finally, he said, "I should go. I need time." Richard nodded. "Take all the time you need." 3 weeks passed without a word. Richard respected Jake's request for space, channeling his energy into improving employee benefits and working conditions. Then one evening, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I'll be at Mom's bench tonight at 7, if you want to talk." Richard's heart raced. He replied, "I'd like that." That evening, Richard found the bench in Memorial Park. The plaque read, "In loving memory of Laura Matthews Connelly, who found beauty in everyday moments." He sat down, running his fingers over the inscription. At precisely 7 o'clock, Jake appeared. They sat in silence, watching the ducks glide across the pond. Finally, Jake spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about being there if you'd known. It's hard to let go of the idea that my father knew about me and didn't care." Richard nodded. "I understand." Jake continued, "After Mom died, I found a box of letters she never sent you. Letters telling you about me, about our life. She wrote them but never mailed them." Richard felt a rush of emotions, grief, anger, gratitude. "Why do you think she never sent them?" Jake shrugged. "Pride, maybe, fear." In one letter, she wrote that she didn't want to burden you or hold you back. Richard's voice broke. "If I had known about you, nothing would have kept me from being part of your life." Jake looked at him, tears in his eyes. "This doesn't change everything. I'm still leaving. But maybe we can figure this out. One day at a time." Richard smiled. "One day at a time." As the sun set over the park, father and son sat side by side on Laura's bench. Not quite a family yet, but no longer strangers. It was a beginning. Moral of the story: life is full of second chances. It's never too late to make things right, to reconnect, and to build something meaningful from the pieces of the past. Thank you for listening to this emotional journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thanks for being part of our community. Until next time, take care.
If you'd like to show some extra love, tap the 3 dots near the share button and send a super thanks.